So before I even say who we are, I feel I have to say thank you very much to everyone who's still here, because it's now after 5 p.m. on Friday, and I think you all have to be commended for your perseverance. So thank you very much for hanging around for another session on AI. Secondly, to introduce ourselves, my name is Euan Robertson. I'm the head of Oliver Wyman's office here in Athens, Oliver Wyman being a strategy consultancy. And because we're a strategy consultancy, we have to present on AI, which, as we heard in the last panel, is a big deal. And I'm very glad to be joined also by Glaser, who is an expert on this topic and doing work across Europe. And AI is a big deal, since ChatGPT came out over a year ago now, we've been expecting the world to fall apart and be completely replaced in a new image. And I think, as we heard on the last panel, to some extent it has and to some extent it hasn't. And we wanted to, in this talk, disaggregate a little bit what it is that you need to do to make AI effective in the real world, and to challenge the idea about whether exactly how much it's going to change the world. And that's why our talk is intelligent enough for the real world. You might imagine 3 different ways in which you could see AI after the last year. You could be a doubter. You could say, look, ChatGPT came out. I thought that everything was going to change. I thought that I could now chat with computers and they would probably do my job. And yet here I am still making slides and making my own presentations and talking to people. This is a bit disappointing. So you could be the doubter. Or you could be the visionary. You could be Elon Musk and you could say, well, it's only another couple of years. And in fact, the real problem we'll have is thinking what to do with all of our free time, because we won't have jobs anymore. And maybe, some people see this as a bad thing, but personally I see this as a great thing, because I'm very happy to be fully replaced by a robot. But it doesn't seem that likely. And so you might instead be a realist and say, well, clearly something has happened, because I can talk to my computer, but it hasn't gone all the way, because it doesn't seem ready to be let loose on the business world yet. And so I think I'm probably in this camp. It's probably the obvious camp. But Rainer is going to take us through why you might believe some of these different views, and hopefully going to make it a bit easier for us to understand how it could be let loose in the business world as well.
Yeah, thanks, Euan. I have my own view on this, but we decided we would ask the AI itself first and just prompt a version of GPT that we are running on our side and ask that question. Which of the 3 paradigms do you think is going to happen, is more likely? And I appreciate if it's a bit small, we're not going to make you to read the answer. But basically, we pose that question between the 3 scenarios. Is it a bubble? Is it going to change the world more than any technical revolution? And is it going to be somewhere in between? We asked GPTX to give us an answer. If you were able to read this, it is giving an answer, but it's not giving us any real information. All the comments and all the topics that it's bringing up on the screen and as a response, we all read in the internet somewhere before, we read in the newspapers. So there's not real content, there's no real reasoning behind what generative AI gives us ex ante. Therefore we said, let's try to prompt it a bit more, let's try to force it. And again, let's reiterate the question to say, we're not going to let you off the hook. We're going to push it to say, which one of those scenarios do you think it's going to happen? And it did a smart thing. It said, look, I don't know. That's basically the first sentence. I was not trained to give you an answer. And then it was basically repeating the topics it came up with before, to say all 3 scenarios are possible. Most likely the reality is going to be a mixture of those scenarios. But frankly, I don't know, and I was not trained to give you that answer. Therefore, we said, okay, if that's not doable, let's hypothesize a bit further. And we all know that generative AI is good in generating text, it's good in generating pictures. Therefore, we said, let's go through those 3 scenarios again, and let's hypothesize how the life of a normal family would look like in a couple of years down the line, if generative AI is a bubble, if it's the biggest technical revolution ever, or if it's somewhere in between. It did those pictures. Again, if you were able to see those pictures in a bit more detail, it is picking certain themes in there that everybody was talking about before. It's the ways of communication, the ways of transport, the sophistication of robotics of the devices we're using at home. It's picking those elements and is changing those across the pictures it was generating, right? Again, it's doing something that's plausible. It gets some of the things wrong, which you can't see in those pages. Just by looking at it and just logically, some of the things are wrong. It believes into some principles. Why it's always the same set of parents, the same set of children. There's always some pets involved. So some pets turn out to be robots in a scenario where we say AI, generative AI is going to change the world. Again, no big insight. Then we said we want to take it further. It doesn't work on the simple things, so it probably doesn't work really in business life. So if you want to use generative AI to help us solve a business problem, and we're picking one example here, which is from the banking sphere, it's a credit risk example, but you could think of it as any other business problem you want to solve with generative AI that requires more than being able to understand text, or generate pictures. The problem doesn't become simpler, and that's what you see on the pictures as well. So we said, can you design a solution for a certain business problem? Can you design a solution that is doing credit risk assessment in our example? It came up with a fancy picture, but it didn't have any meaning. So we fed that engine with a real textbook on the problem. So something an analyst would be reading to solve and crack the problem. It changed the picture. It made the picture more fancy. It's coming up with fancy dashboards, and it's trying to use complicated phrases in the second example. But again, it didn't help us in any sense to solve the problem. Now, some people would argue, especially the visionary people, would say it was a bit unfair. You didn't prompt that thing correctly, and you were just raising a generic question, which is very difficult to solve. Therefore, we said, let's give more guidance. Let's ask it to suggest a piece of code that would crack that business problem. Now, we all know generative AI is good in generating code because it could learn from rules, right? It could learn from how a functioning code looks like, how a procedural, a modular setup would look like. Therefore, if we wrap that question into saying, can you write a piece of code to solve our business problem? It gave us a piece of code. I ran this code, it was working. It didn't come back with error messages, and it was producing an output. But again, this output was not really usable. It was a trivial outcome that didn't solve my business problem. And that's why I said it's probably more needed than this. It's more needed than single prompting and feeding an engine with a bit of information, given that most of these engines come from a completely different world, right? They come from a world of saying, I understand text. And that's a variant of the business problem we have been looking at. We said, let's assume your business problem depends on information that you can read from newspapers, for example. Can you process that information, and can you sort of convert that information into something that helps us solving our business problem? It didn't. It was just reading the text of these newspaper items, for example. It was feeding it through. It was generating an output that didn't really help us to solve the problem. It only changed in the moment where we said, okay, it's an unfair ask because that machine did never learn about the business expertise we had or the business expertise that anyone would be using to solve that problem, right? And only in this moment, where I said we want to train the generative AI engine to be able to learn from our experience, somebody else's experience, then it started figuring out what is the relevant information in the input it has been fed with. So in this case, the news items and the news articles, we said, these are the things we want you to process to generate an answer to the question we're posing, right? And I think this is coming back to our previous hypotheses or the three scenarios. I do think AI, generative AI, is going to change the world, but there's some work for us to be done, and it's not going to happen from today to tomorrow, and it's not going to happen with us learning how to use it. It's going to require some investment. It's going to require some education, some additional education beyond the generic capabilities it comes with. So it needs to understand the business problem we want to solve. And we heard in the previous sessions as well, there's a bit of risk involved, right? We all got to know that a model with 5 parameters can be wrong because it's mostly a statistical model. These models come with 5 billion or more parameters. It's sort of a no-brainer to say those can and will be wrong in practice as well. And maybe they will be wrong even more frequently than the traditional models that we're all used to. That's something we need to control. At the same time, if I want to use or have those engines solving business problems, I need to have confidence and I need to have transparency. And both things I need to build into the generic large language models, the generative AI machines that are out there. Otherwise, it will stick to a sandbox mode and a sandbox environment. It will not help us to solve business problems at scale. And connected to solving business problems, of course, and that's something that you find in practice being as important as developing a smart algorithm, is really to say the AI, generative AI engine that you're deploying needs to be connected to the value chain and the type of business you're running as an organization. Without that, might be disconnected, isolated, a nice use case that is maybe doing interesting things, but it's not going to pay off. It's not going to help us to advance and achieve those ambitions and achieve those visions that the visionary people might think of. So again, there's some homework and some work we need to do together. And to wrap up, I think it's going to be a journey. It's not going to be a big bang change because, especially after ChatGPT and when the first focus really started, there were voices out there that were saying, well, within 3 months down the line, the workforce will change completely. We're going to lose X% of our staff or our employees will not be needed anymore. Nothing of this did happen. And it didn't happen exactly because of this reason. There's some additional work, there's some facilitation we all need to do to really transform it into something that is paying off and helping us advance, which is going to happen. At this stage, I think we're sticking to the quite simplistic use cases. It is possible to do way more complicated things than preparing documents, than summarizing. We spoke about, or we heard about the co-pilot elements. These are all very interesting use cases, but there's more complicated stuff out there, and just being conscious of time, I'm jumping to the last one, which is one of the most complicated ones we are or we have been doing, is really use AI, generative AI, in the space of software development and in the space of designing software, hardware architecture for firms that need to do this for a variety of requirements, for a variety of entities in their group of companies. We managed to do this. We managed to do this successfully. Again, it was a hard piece of work to go through, and the algorithms and the engines that are using and running this and are producing this output nowadays derive from the generic engines, but they're quite evolved. They have been educated quite a bit, and they're fully embedded into a framework that allows us to control, gain confidence, and, well, make the output transparent and usable for the human being that in most places these days is still taking the decisions, the business decisions, in particular the critical ones. And that's also something we heard before. That's going to remain the normal mode for quite some time going forward, that we will be able to use AI, generative AI, in a very efficient fashion, but we will keep controlling it for quite some time, and we will need the means and the capabilities and the understanding for this.
Okay. Thank you very much. Apologies that our slides are very small.